We're going. All right. Well, poor Ray is. She's
I know. I'm gonna Slack her and see what's going
Yeah.
on because she's been trying to get on for a little bit here. Um, 46. Actually, if it's just audio, you can probably see the chat.
Okay.
Yeah, Ray's on Slack. They're typing right now.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Just settling in. Okay, that's cool.
Hi there.
Hey.
Hey there.
Thought we were having like technical difficulties.
Oh, no worries. I just hadn't clicked on join audio quite yet.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, yeah, it's not quite time yet. We still have 1 minute. So I am recording this. You probably saw that in my messages, just for people who can't attend. So I know it's kind of difficult because it's an asynchronous course and you want to have speakers, but
Yeah.
yeah, not everyone can attend. But this way, at least, we're recording it, so they'll have a chance to listen to everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We can just have a conversation and hopefully there'll be some info that helps people.
Right. Yeah.
That's interesting to them.
Okay. Just give it like 2 more minutes.
Sounds good.
Cool. All right, get rid of my don't forget to record note. Oh boy. So how big is your is Bridgewater State? Is it comparative to like Simmons or like
It's about 10,000 students total.
okay.
So it's not huge, but it's a good size. It's got sort of it's got a good set of programs, really amazing international studies set
cool.
of opportunities, which is cool. So yeah, it's definitely different from Wentworth where I was before, and I like that I'm a humanities person, even though I sort of veered into technology. So it's nice to. So I have a degree in Irish literature,
Yeah.
a master's, and there's an Irish studies department here, which is awesome. So I'm actually talking to the chair of that or the coordinator for that department, and I'm going to give a talk to some English majors who are minoring in Irish studies.
Oh, that's
In a couple weeks, which I'm looking forward to because I haven't done that in so long. I'm like actually super nervous about that.
I'm sure it's like riding a bike. It'll all come
Yeah,
back to you.
we'll see. I don't know.
Well, that's like Python because I was programming in R and they're like, oh, yeah, can you teach Python? I'm like, yeah, sure, not a problem.
Sure.
But yeah, it comes back.
R is harder than Python, I think. So,
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it is. I feel, yeah.
In my opinion, it is. I think, yeah.
It's different. I mean, a lot of people could say they're a lot alike in a lot of ways, but yeah, they're still different. Oh, hey, yay. Sarah's here.
All right.
Cool.
Why do I know that name? Why do I know Sarah? Hi, Sarah. I feel like I know her name.
Really?
Yeah, no,
From-
actually, there's a student here. I think her name is Melanie Tyrell, maybe, who is actually thinking of going to Simmons next year, who
Okay,
was talking to me. That's why it is. They have the same last name.
same last name.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, Sarah. You're muted. Okay. I guess we could get started. People hop on, they hop on.
Sure.
So welcome everyone. Welcome Kevin. Thank you for joining us. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about Kevin's background. He's currently a PhD student in the School of Library and Information Science at Simmons, and the Dean of the Library at Bridgewater State University. And he's worked for more than 25 years in academic and research libraries, and holds a Master's of Arts degree in Irish Literature from Boston College, and also a Master of Science degree in Library and Information Science from Syracuse University. Previously, Kevin was director of the library at Wentworth Institute of Technology and head of technology for the Boston College University Libraries. He has deep experience in library administration, space planning, technology, software development, and system design and implementation. And Kevin is also the vice president of the board of directors of the Ames Free Library in Easton, Massachusetts, and is a past president of the Fenway Library Organization. Wow, that's a lot. A lot of stuff. So Kevin's here. He's going to talk about his journey, I guess, and definitely talk about systems analysis and design, because that's what we're doing in this class. And I definitely have some questions. We'll do questions at the end, and so I'll just hand it over to you, Kevin.
Great, thank you. Since we have just a small group here, we can have a conversation, I think. So Ray and Sarah, would you both mind, introducing yourselves, and kind of maybe you tell me a little bit about how you got here and what your interests are generally in libraries, library science, library technology. Maybe Ray, go first.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I'm at a desktop that doesn't have a camera, but I can turn on my mic and talk.
All good.
So I am in my third year, final semester of the Library and Information Science program here. I just switched into the Information Science Technology track formally last semester, but it's been a developing interest. I originally came in thinking that I would take a job as a public librarian. I did some work as a technology librarian over the course of the pandemic. And at the moment, I'm sort of reorienting and thinking that I may end up going into something more IT or software engineering oriented, although still with a great fondness for libraries and an interest in, if I can make both of them work out at the same time in the same position, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. Excellent. Sarah, are you able to have a mic, Sarah?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, hi.
Okay, I actually work at Simmons in technology.
Okay.
I support enterprise applications. So I have a degree in computer science, and since I work at Simmons, I entered the library science program because I'm interested in information science and that kind of stuff as well. And I actually live in Easton, so that's my library, the Ames Free Library.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's so funny. Maybe that's another reason I know you. Your name is very familiar to me when I saw you. Yeah, that's great. You work in enterprise applications? Like, do you work on Workday or?
Workday, yes. That's been my life for the last 3 years almost. Yeah.
Just was it? What was it before that? Was it Banner?
Colleague.
Oh, okay,
We're
yeah.
by the same company now.
Yeah.
But we were a colleague school.
Right.
And
Okay.
moving to Workday.
Yeah. Okay.
Actually, their team activity is an ongoing analysis of the Workday system at Simmons, which is interesting because I'm thinking of compiling all the data and handing it over to admin. Because
Yeah.
they're coming up with a lot of issues. Like we're looking basically at the registration system in particular. That
Right,
system, so.
right. So, yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, Workday is relatively new, so it's not surprising that there's going to be a lot of issues on
Yeah,
it.
they've been building, Workday has been building the student system kind of like while we were adopting it.
Yeah, yeah,
We weren't the first school by any means, but we're
Yeah.
in one of the early cohorts. Yeah.
right. So I've been in that situation also, where the software is being built as you use it, and the vendors are advertising that you're using the software successfully while they're building the software that you're having trouble using. So not to sound cynical, but this is how things go. So I'll tell you a little bit about my background. I actually started as a humanities person. I still consider myself humanities. I studied literature in undergrad with no particular goal in mind. I just liked reading. And then I didn't get a job after college, and I went to grad school at BC and studied Irish literature. Again, with a vague idea that maybe I'll, get a doctorate and teach in university. And so I did the master's at Boston College in Irish Lit, which was really cool. I mean, I loved it. But and then I was going to go to BU and do a master or a PhD in Irish literature, specifically James Joyce. And by the time I got to sort of the end of the program, I had taken a summer job at the BC Law Library, and they were literally, when I got there, were rebuilding the new law library. This is sort of the early 90s, mid 90s, and I started working in the library, and I really liked it. And I said, okay, I'm just going to pause the PhD, and I'll go and do and work in the library for a while. And I ended up sort of never going back. I mean, now I just, a couple of years ago started the program at Simmons and SLIS, but all those years in between, I ended up going into technology. And so I got hired full-time at BC Law. I went to Syracuse University then and did my MLIS there. And at the time in the 90s, actually, I mean, it still is a really good school for libraries and technology. They had some faculty, like this was pre-Google days. They were working on all this natural language search technology. And it's just sort of the explosion of the internet at the time, pre sort of, Web 2.0. So it was Web 1.0 days. And it was pretty cool. I really liked it and got sort of captivated by it. So I focused entirely, like I sort of did all the core courses that you had to do in library science. So, you had to take a cataloging course, and you take a reference course, and take a library administration course, and all those things. But and then I took every tech course I could. I actually went to Boston College, which had a computer science program, and took things like SQL there, which you really couldn't get at the time. At Syracuse, I took some programming courses. So it was really cool. And then when I got my first professional job stayed at Boston College and worked in the systems office at BC, which at the time was also brand new. Like they had people who were doing systems, but they finally created sort of a department that was separate from the sort of tech services area. And I'm obviously dating myself here because I mean, I've been doing this a while, and I was lucky enough then just sort of to be Boston College also at the time was making a big push to be an R1 school. So Research 1, heavily research. When I was initially there, they were not an R1 school in terms of their Carnegie rating. So there's actually a lot of investment in the library too. And we got really involved in all kinds of tech development and implementation, just opportunities. So Ex Libris now, for example, has an integrated library system, or it's really a library services platform that's cloud-based, called Alma. But we were only the second, and the system that came in before Alma. So currently, if you go to Ex Libris and you want to get an ILS for your library, they're going to push Alma on you. But they were an Israeli company, a very small company who had a system called Aleph. And that was the system that predated the current system of Alma. So we actually were the second ones in the nation at BC to implement Aleph. And Notre Dame was the first one. And then that sort of became this big system that was adopted as sort of all over the world. And since we were these early partners with them, we were really involved, not from the development side, but from the sort of implementation side. And this was an example of where they had a system which they had never deployed in a large research library. It was really much smaller libraries in Israel at the time and in the Middle East that they had deployed it. And we were really involved then with essentially the feedback and doing the testing of the system while we were in the process of implementing it. And then Ex Libris built in, there was the whole, at that time also there was a proliferation, say, of online databases and this idea of the library without walls. That was sort of the catchphrase back then. And they were trying to figure out a way, how do you have all these systems that you have to go search. And back then you had this sort of CD-ROM system. So an end user comes in the library. And by the way, my background is entirely in academic libraries. So except as a sort of board member of a public library, but my working background is academic. So that's sort of the point of view I'm coming at here. But end users would come into libraries and have these, you'd have to go to database 1 to find something, database 2 to find something else, database 3 to find something else. There were no discovery systems. Like, for example, we have EDS, the discovery system that we use here at Simmons. All of that didn't exist. You had a library catalog, which was essentially an inventory system that was integrally attached to your integrated library system, which, please forgive me if I'm telling you stuff you already know, but the integrated library system does a set of library administrative features, including cataloging your metadata records, MARC records, really, at the time. This was even before Dublin Core was widely adopted. It does ordering, receiving, doing invoices, payment records, information about vendors. It has the patron database, the front end checkout items stuff. So all that's integrated into a system. And then you have the catalog sitting on top of that, which is literally tied directly to the system. So the catalog only displays or discloses to users the stuff that's in your integrated library system. And people started realizing, well, we have this problem where we have all these multiple systems where people are going, so now Elsevier is producing a database with these e-journals. And you also have this thing called like Sports Discus, which literally was like a console full of CD-ROMs that you could search via a terminal. And so all these distributed systems owned by different vendors, sold separately with different license terms, that all had various types of internet access, but none of which were unified. So you had to search them all separately. So that's a long way of getting to one of the initial ways to solve that was this idea of meta search, where you would have a system that sat on top of those other systems, and you would do a search and it would use a standard search protocol, in this case, something called Z3950. I don't know if you've talked about that, but it's basically a standardized way of searching other systems that themselves had to support the Z3950 protocol. And it would pull all the results back from those separate systems, and then you could display them in a unified interface. That was the ideal, anyway, of it. It worked fairly well for the time. So we were involved in working with Ex Libris to develop that. And again, we weren't doing any of the coding, but we were helping them specify the systems. They had several other universities involved, helping them figure out the use cases, the needs for the systems. I know you guys are probably talking about use case scenarios and things like that, and how you connect with them, or how you use those to sort of build out the system specifications and the needs that you're filling. So we did a lot of that. And then we were involved tangentially in a project that for reference linking called SFX, which was initially developed, I think it's CERN in same place that Tim Berners-Lee worked when he was when he was like inventing the internet. So SFX was a reference linking system that basically was this idea that created this idea of having a knowledge base of the contents of all of these packages that you subscribe to, and using basically a URL structure to connect your knowledge base with a citation to something. So I'm searching something in my catalog, and I click on my SFX link, is what they called it, and it would send a URL to my knowledge base with things like say the ISSN number of a journal, the page number, the volume number, the issue number, and it would go to this database of the knowledge base and find out what packages owned by whom contain that actual article. And it went even a step further than that. It would then basically know whether or not you had access to that, because just because some database has it there doesn't mean that Boston College or Simmons actually paid for access to that. So that was the extremely kind of revolutionary thing about it, was that it was context sensitive in that sense, that it would only show you things that it knew you had access to. So we were involved in that, working on that, and doing, again, use cases and specifications for some of that after Ex Libris bought it from CERN, basically. Let's see, then we got into, again, if you have any questions or I'm just rambling on here, just please jump in. So the next thing that came after that were these, so you had this establishment of these knowledge bases, which systems like metasearch systems and SFX required to run. And it required that the librarians do an enormous amount of work in those systems to configure them, everything from branding them so they look like the system that they're integrating with, for most often your catalog system or something like that, or some other online database, say eJournal database that you subscribe to, making sure that the knowledge base itself actually contains accurate information, which it often didn't, making sure that you are telling the knowledge base what you have and what you don't have, and keeping that up to date as vendors constantly change what they were providing and not providing and things like that. So actually maintaining these systems from a library point of view, the idea was that the end user, it was made it easier for them to use and find materials, which it really did, but it was no time saver, those kind of systems, for the librarians actually behind the scenes who had to maintain that data. And that was sort of the birth of this idea of the e-resources lifecycle management. So to do e-resources, you're starting to figure out that you needed to know an enormous amount of information just to maintain a subscription to one database. You needed to know the contents of that database. You need to make sure that your reference linking system was correctly configured so that it knew you had access to that. If vendors added or removed content, you had to stay on top of that and go into the system and do that. You had to know when your subscription started, when it ended, what the license terms were. Could you loan it to somebody? Could you print out how many copies of it? So there's could people from off campus access it? Oh, and by the way, how do you access things from off campus? You have to set up IP address authentication. What are the campus's IP addresses? Suddenly you have to work more closely with your IT department. Suddenly you're talking about security. Does it load patron data? Uh-oh, does it have passwords? So this was sort of the explosion in the 90s and 2000s of what became systems departments. And it was just an enormous amount of work. And I'm so glad that you all are doing technology in the library context, because it actually took, from where I was sitting, it took many years for library programs to sort of catch up and figure out how to try to start getting this information to students. There's kind of a lag between the explosion of all of this new stuff, which was really coming at warp speed, and libraries sort of trying to catch up and figure out if we have these professionals we're trying to train and prepare to be out there and sort of what they knew. We're way better at it now, but back then it was definitely more difficult. So then the next thing after that, so then one of the things we were involved in, another thing is development of an e-resources management application. So your traditional, and this is actually still a problem for a lot of libraries, including where I'm sitting right now, Bridgewater State. Bridgewater State still has a system called Koha, which is mainly it's written in PHP. It is a system that was designed initially. It's an open source system sitting on top of a MySQL database. And it was designed really initially for public libraries. And it was designed as most old school integrated library systems are designed. It was designed to basically manage print. And to manage e-resources and the e-resources lifecycle, you need much more information. There's a huge penumbra of information around a thing that you need to keep and maintain. So print, you buy the book. You need some info about the vendor. You need their pay address, maybe a contact to order something, a URL. You buy the book, you get it, you receive it, you catalog it, you process it, put a dust jacket on it, do all that, put it on the shelf, and boom, that's done. E-resources management, you need to know when do you need to renew it. You need to get, you need to know, is that thing that you're paying for being used? Because essentially you're renting this information. Is all of that every year you got to go really to do it effectively. You have to say, are people using this? Are we getting a bang for a buck? Is there an alternative, cheaper edition of this thing that we could subscribe to from another vendor? All of those things are constantly, so it's a cycle that you have to keep going back and forth. You can never just put a thing on the shelf and be done with it. So that required a whole set of data and information that you simply cannot do in most integrated library systems, even those that are still out there. Alma, Ex Libris's Alma platform has much better integrated e-resources management, but most of them do not. And that's, if you're going out there in the world and getting into systems in libraries, you really need to understand that, because I guarantee you're going to be sucked into dealing with a process for figuring out how to manage e-resources. So there's this growth of these ERM systems, e-resource management systems. The Digital Library Federation in the 2000s, early 2000s, had created this huge data model that essentially took all of the data elements that are required to manage the e-resources lifecycle, and they put it out there and they said, this is everything you need to know, and here's the relationships among this data. So I don't know what extent you've learned relational database systems or SQL or things like that, but basically it was almost an SQL-like relational data model. But there were no systems that had adopted it, or had only adopted parts of it. So I actually, when I was working at BC, I wrote an application that took that model and wrote it in Perl, actually, and used a MySQL database. And then I had a bunch of connections with what was our Aleph system then. And basically we sort of glommed onto our system this set of tools to manage e-resources. And that was sort of a stopgap measure, because it was really customized totally internally. It wasn't something you could put out there and really sell without an enormous amount of work. And then so people start building e-resource management systems. So now you have separate systems, like vendors started selling vendors had already built these knowledge bases, right? To manage things like their SFX reference linking, and to manage things like MetaLib and meta search engines. So they then use that data set as to power e-resources management tools, which they then sold to libraries. But simultaneously, libraries started implementing their own systems like that. So Coral is an example of one that's out there, that's an open source system that's also written in PHP. It has all the data elements you need to manage e-resources, but unfortunately, it doesn't natively integrate with any other existing system. So to this day, it is still the holy grail of integrated library systems to build a really effective e-resources management application that works closely with print management. I don't know why after 20 years this is still so hard, but it actually is. And I'll give you an example. So Ex Libris, who went back in the day when I was at BC, was sort of the small Israeli company, now is a monster. They're a global company who has bought up tons and tons and tons of other systems from other companies. There's a librarian and a blogger and a researcher named, I just had his name in my mind, Marshall Breeding. Marshall Breeding he does every year, he does a survey of the landscape of library technologies, including integrated library systems. And if you go back and look at him, he creates this great visualization where he basically shows over time the consolidation of the industry for integrated library systems and library management systems and things like that. And you see, like the rest of industry in the world, it's all consolidating. So you have these monstrous companies that have gone and bought up there used to be tons and tons of these choices for libraries, from special libraries, school libraries, public libraries, academic libraries. And now it's all getting consolidated, and these companies are sort of buying I would say they're doing the kind of vertically integrated purchasing of the research process. That is something else that if you go into your careers, you should be aware of, the consolidation of this stuff in the system, and what it leads to this is me editorializing now, but it leads to fewer choices just in the market. But these companies also package and sell their products in ways that don't necessarily align with the needs of the libraries and the library users. Rather, they package them and sell them in a way that aligns with their needs to make money for shareholders. And those two things aren't the same thing. The way we need our data and information systems organized and don't necessarily align with these companies, especially with the way these companies package things. And so that's just something I think if you get out there in the world, just be aware of that. And there are attempts, I won't go down that road because it's a big rabbit hole, but suffice it to say that for some reason we still, and I don't know if it's market forces or consolidation, but we do not have the tools we need to effectively manage e-resources in libraries now, not really. And a lot of it, I think, has to do with the fact that companies want to sell you a suite of tools and make money off of it. And they're not going to give you their data, and they're not going to give you their knowledge bases and things like that. So anyway, I'm done editorializing about that. But one of the answers to that is a system that's still being developed now that I was lucky enough to be involved with at Wentworth, which is called Folio. So Folio was an interesting, it's still going on. It's an interesting partnership between EBSCO, who is one of these behemoth companies that sells information products to libraries and makes a lot of money doing it. But EBSCO always made their money off of selling packages of, say, e-resources, online databases. There are companies actually much bigger than that, and they do other things, including like fishing licenses and other just crazy other stuff. But their main product are these or these information sources. And so Ex Libris, the monster, had their own data, their own big knowledge base. EBSCO had their own big knowledge base. There was a big fight about 10 years ago where they were trying to come up with a deal where they could share their information so that, far be it for us to ask, that libraries could actually access the entirety of the research information landscape. Unfortunately, they were not able to come to a deal. So nowadays, if I use an Ex Libris product that has a knowledge base, it might have some EBSCO stuff in there, but you can't really just directly access it easily the way if you use all of the full stack of Ex Libris's products, and vice versa. EBSCO only had the data and the information products, and no system to actually deliver those products. Whereas Ex Libris had the knowledge base, a set of systems, and EBSCO just had the knowledge base, as it were, and a few tools that you could use. But they didn't have an integrated library system, a library services platform like Ex Libris had. So that led to EBSCO actually partnering with universities around the world to develop an open source company called Folio, or an open source product called Folio. And we were involved. I was actually on the governing board of the project for a little while. So that's a whole other interesting thing. I know I'm going all over the place. Please, I'm sorry. I should stop talking and let you ask some questions. But just to say, one of the really interesting things about system and system development, especially if you get into open source products like Folio, is what is the governance structure of it? That is, how, once you start developing it, who decides what are the needs? What are the use cases? Who's the customer? Who's the developer? To explain, Folio is developed literally simultaneously by people working for a commercial company, EBSCO, by developers mainly at large research universities who have systems departments where people can sit down and write code, people who know how to use the agile development methodology. I don't know if you're talking about agile as a development methodology. Folio is built in agile versus we use a waterfall development methodology for Alma some years ago. So we can talk about that a little bit as those kind of processes for systems analysis and development. But Folio is this big system that's being developed in multiple places with constituents who were all the way from a private company that needs this to make money to compete with the monster Ex Libris, to university, to Texas A&M University and Duke University, which don't want to use those big Ex Libris systems because they don't really, in the end, work as well for the needs of those libraries as a system that you could develop and customize entirely on your own. So with all that hodgepodge of people, how do you get them together to even agree upon what is the priority to develop? What are the system need? What are the needs for the system? What is functionality that needs to go? How are we even going to administer systems? How are permissions granted? How granular? Like all of this stuff. When you're developing with Ex Libris, as we did, they sit down, they ask you those questions, they go back, they do something, come back, you test it, and you go back and forth. Versus this chaos of trying to develop and then govern for the future management of a system that is owned by nobody officially. Maybe we actually created a foundation, a nonprofit foundation, to sort of own and govern Folio. But it's an interesting question that if you're in the library world and you really start developing and working on systems like that, it's super exciting and interesting, but it's also a chaos and a mess. So it's much easier to work with a at the company like Ex Libris, because they'll send their developers, they'll sit down and they'll go through a very formal process, much like the one that the ones you are discussing. But the way those things happen sort of in practice can in the end be really different. So there's sort of this ideal process that you go and you do things like this. But to be honest, my experience has been, if it's controlled by one company, you can kind of recognize the process a lot more easily than when it's say an open source process. And I say that just because I guarantee, if you go into systems, you are in some way somehow going to get involved in open source projects, and by nature they're really different things. All right, I'm going to stop there because I've just literally been talking nonstop for 35 minutes. I'm sorry. Do you have any questions or anything?
Does anyone else have like, so you're saying that the whole thing that with universities getting together has to do with that EBSCO had to be involved, I guess, to kind of bring that together. How come that you don't think that universities tried to do it without a commercial partner? Or if a university already had to build their own system, that they haven't tried to, like, some people must have systems that are working for them now. I mean, if not everyone is using Ex Libris, have they ever tried to like give away their basic concepts or systems and let people kind of work from there?
Yeah, I think so. I think those are really good questions. I mean, there's a lot of software out there, especially things like discovery systems. I don't know if you've discussed those, but they're systems that essentially ingest data from external systems, main metadata about journals, journal articles, whatever, books, and then indexes them using something like Solr Index or Elasticsearch or something that allows for relevance ranking and full text indexing, and then allows you to sort of get an integrated view, let's say, of all your library resources. There's a few of those systems that have been developed actually by universities, especially big research universities, and it's open source and it's free software, and a community has built up around those to kind of update and extend that software. There's things like Viewfind or Blacklight are two examples of discovery systems that do that. Commercial versions are EBSCO's EBSCO Discovery Service, or Ex Libris's Primo, are two other examples of commercial ones. The goal of a lot of this software development has been of new integrated library services platforms has been to push them to the cloud, for one thing, because many of these legacy systems you have to run on local servers, or you can hire companies. For example, a company called Bywater hosts an enormous number of instances of Koha, the old integrated library system. But one of the problems in the end, and one of the reasons to develop the new technology, you want to build technologies that's natively cloud-based, that has well-documented, well-developed APIs, RESTful APIs, JSON, XML APIs, so you can open up access to most, if not all, of the system services without actually having to use that system software. So it's about flexibility. There's also the mantle for a commercial company like EBSCO. This is sort of getting the political side of it, but the mantle of saying, we're EBSCO, we provide all these awesome data services. We're on the side of open, free access to these systems, and we're going to support that. Versus in the market, a company like Ex Libris actually over the years has been tightening access and restricting access to their data services and things like that. And that's the reason you have these big research libraries like Texas A&M and Duke, who are starting to pull away from those systems because of that lack of freedom, this commercial tightening down, and this insistence that you have to use their entire technology stack in order to use any one of their systems. So if you want to buy, if I want to buy the services of Ex Libris, and I want to, I just wanted to do some e-resource management and patron management for my library, but I want to use a different discovery service to index all of my resources. Ex Libris will not let you. You contractually are not allowed to do that. You have to pay for it, and they can do that because of their power in the market. So, so there are tools out there, and they're not necessarily satisfactory. I mean, and it's extremely expensive for even for a large, well-funded university to go and develop systems like that on their own. EBSCO's strategy also is, if they already had a system that was, and by the way, one of the selling points of Folio is that it's built on microservices. So literally you can access any service of the system, anything. And so you could build an API or connect to it via a piece of middleware, whatever you want to do to access those services, versus almost everything else is locked down or simply doesn't have APIs for it. So, so what that means is that not only is EBSCO saying, hey, we're on the side of this open access, really, they're really interested not in supporting and building software like that. If they had it, they would probably give it away, because they see that as a way to sell more of information products. Because they say, not only will we be able to integrate our information products, which you probably are already paying for, you can also integrate other people's information products, and we don't care. We're not going to lock down all of it. So that's why working with a company like that kind of, there's different interests involved, but they all kind of come together in the sense that they're saying, look, we're going to share all this stuff. We're going to share the huge cost of development of a system like this, whose complexity rivals things like Workday and stuff like that. So, so you know, it's a good question, but this is my view from where I was sitting of why it's gone like this.
Yeah, so basically, you know, we think, you know, ideally, if things are open source, that's great. You know, we can just, you know, build our own. But yeah, like you said, there's so many other things that you have to consider. Like you have to have a community, you have to have, you know, somebody that's going to write the documentation, and it's just, yeah, it seems like it's a great idea. But I remember COA, and I remember, like, you know, years back that was, everyone's like so excited about it, you know, like this is gonna be, this is it, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. It's, you know, COA actually as a system, you know, for most places it works. And one of the things, if you're choosing a system, if you're in a position ever to choose a system, one of the things I would recommend that you always think of is, what do you have ownership and access to all the data in that system, right? Are they gonna, and Koha, even though we have it hosted, so Bridgewater, for example, has it hosted by Bywater, but Koha actually has, I can directly access the full database behind the system. It has an API, a JSON API, but it also, I can literally query, download, update, extract directly from the database any data that's in that system. Which, if I don't if I don't have a well-developed API, or I have another legacy system that I need to get data out of this system to either batch upload it or to write a piece of middleware to integrate them or what have you, you can do that. You have to have the skill to do it, but you can. So yeah, I mean, in that sense, I think Koha is more flexible, say, than something like a fully developed commercial system like Alma. Alma has a pretty well developed API, but they have all these rules where they lock it down. This has nothing to do with the tech. It really has to do with business practices and their commercial policies. But one of the other things is I can't just access at any moment all of the data in Alma. My data can't do it. They won't give me that kind of access. And that to me is also extremely problematic. Ray, were you going to say something?
No, I'm just following along. I was working at a public library that had just implemented Koha the last 2 years. And I did see that, you know, that breadth of access and that flexibility in the system. Unfortunately, as a small public library, we didn't really have the staffing or the tech literacy among the staff to take advantage of it in the ways that we would have liked. So we ended up running into the classic open source problem of it having a not terribly intuitive interface,
right,
and documentation that had been written by what seemed like a rolling set of volunteers over time.
And that's probably exactly what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, we loved the, it was a big upgrade on what they had been using shortly before they hired me, which was Follett. But at the same time, even by the time I left, they didn't really have SQL reporting set up. There were a lot of features of the system that they still had not figured out how to access.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, that's the perennial problem in libraries in general. Is all of this technology requires even the supposedly most simple sort of turnkey out of the box solution requires some level of technical knowledge to implement and to then administer and maintain. And if you really, for any piece of software, it's been in my experience anyway, if you're going to get the full advantage of using that, whatever it may be, you really have to have somebody who has some understanding of the software. It might not be that you need to know how to write SQL queries, but it's even a matter of knowing enough to ask the right questions.
Yeah.
I mean, that is really fundamental. Like, I'll give you an example. I've been at Bridgewater since November, and we use ILLiad, which is a piece of software for interlibrary loan. It's owned by OCLC now, I think, and it was developed by Atlas Systems. In any case, it's been around for a while. Over the years, people have developed these little plugins that allow, and it's not all developed by Atlas, they're developed by third-party people. So some developer at some university wants integration so that from the ILLiad interface, they can search Koha. So there's a Koha plugin that you can install. And it's something called a Lua script, which is a little bit like Python or something like that, right? And so I have two people working in my ILL department who know how to use the interface as it is, but if they run into any problems, they don't know what questions to ask to figure out how to fix it. I mean, that's been the issue. So for example, before I got here, they had spent a month trying to get the IP address ranges that Bridgewater State University uses for all of their public facing internet access. So it's literally what's a range? It's 167.162. to 167.162.255 or whatever the range is. And that's all they needed to make this functionality work, so that the Copyright Clearance Center, who, you know, records what we loan and we have to pay fees to them for copyright, right? They have this little plugin that allows them to use the Copyright Clearance Center. Copyright Clearance Center, for it to work, needs to know our IP ranges, so he knows where it coming from and where the requests are coming from, et cetera. And that was a month of them going back and forth with our IT department, who is sending them, who our IT department obviously knows what our IP ranges are, but they just didn't know how to ask the question.
Right.
Didn't know. So people were sending them screenshots of our DNS server and like all the subnets, and like it was gibberish to this poor woman working down in ILL, you know. And so I guess it would have been a 5-minute max thing to fix if there was somebody just to speak the language. And they didn't have to do anything. All they had to do was take from the university the information, make sure that it was correctly formatted and described in a way that people at Copyright Clearance Center could then update their systems so that those two could then talk. Yeah, so, and I mean, just throughout my career, I have a million of those stories. The amount of time wasted because people aren't speaking the same language and don't know it is just incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, most of the work that I did end up doing on Koha, you know, far short of being able to add features like we had hoped, was serving as that middle piece between the engineering team at our hosting provider and the librarians who were working with the system every day.
Right.
And most of it was just trying to keep the connection between Koha and our single sign-on for Overdrive open, so that
Right.
people could like download ebooks without their app crashing constantly.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
that's the level we were operating at.
Yeah. No, I mean, and you know, in my ideal, like in my ideal world, and this is the case, you know, again, I'm speaking from academic libraries, but this is absolutely the case for public libraries and any other kind, is the library can and should be a kind of glue between, say, the IT people and the people who speak the IT language, and then the end users. We should be right there in the middle. We should be those translators and the people who support that kind of thing that help people get through. And this gets back to sort of my sense of like what we should be doing as you know, when we're training professionals going into MLS programs. We've got, no matter what, you have to understand certain things. There's fundamental things that no matter what job you're in, no matter where, you're gonna, there's questions are gonna come up, you're gonna have to know, even if you don't know how to sit down and open a terminal and query the DNS server, whatever, you can, you need to kind of know that language. I just think it's extremely important. And it's a great service, because IT departments, and Sarah, this is not in any way against IT departments. IT people are worried about infrastructure. They're worried about security. They're worried about administrative systems, not so much end users. You know, there's always support for it, but that's not their primary focus. And I think that's where librarians are trained, that the first question you ask is, what is the effect on the user? How can we help this person? And that's why I think we haven't gotten there as a profession. In some areas we have, but we could be much more effective as people to help to be that glue between the tech side and the end users who might be spending 2 hours trying to find out what's the freaking IP address range, you know? So.
Yeah, I feel you hit it right on the head. I mean, that's basically how I feel our profession, especially the IS&T, the technical, yeah, it is that we're that bridge. We can speak to the IT. We know what they say, open a terminal. We're like, if we don't know, we can figure it out. Like,
Right.
but by now we do. I mean, I think, you know, if you come through any of these programs, you should have that ability.
Yeah.
But so wow, it's getting close. We have about 3 minutes.
Sorry I talked so much.
No, I think it was
This-
great. It was very, very, you gave us a lot of insight. I'm speaking for myself, but I'm sure Sarah and Ray, this is very interesting. You have a lot of experience and yeah, so I think we have time for one more question if Ray or Sarah, do you have one? If not, I have one.
Go ahead.
Okay, all right. I wanted to give you guys a chance though. So yeah, so basically we were talking earlier about the careers that at Bridgewater State University, you might have some things opening up. If you could just talk a little bit about what kind of things that are coming down the pike, I guess.
Sure. So we're going to be hiring an e-resources management librarian. And that person will have to, as I was describing, long-windedly, the whole issue about really building an e-resources management process for the library here, including implementing the technology, but there's the whole policy side, data standards, like just everything that would be involved. It's going to involve multiple systems. It involves all the departments here working with the reference librarians who are or the liaisons who are working with the departments, all the way to working with our systems people. So it's a really interesting job that requires tech savvy, but it also requires you understand something about the industry, about how vendors package their information products and all that stuff. I think it's really interesting. But like a lot of libraries, we have not really done that yet here. So e-resources management is going to be key, and I'm hoping we can find someone who's really interested in it, and even if they don't have a ton of experience, who's interested in learning, kind of building a process there, because it's extremely important. The other thing is we are actually going to be opening up a digital services librarian position. So we have a we call it the virtual commons, but basically it's a Bpress instance of a institutional repository. So we've implemented the publishing platform. So we have 4 or 5 academic journals we publish, as well as internal publications, faculty scholarship. We have a lot of digitized materials from our archives and want to do more digitization. So that role would be involved in all that. And that's really like a classic digital libraries type position. Another one we're looking at is a sort of, and this might be good entry level for some people, is basically a technology coordinator for the library. So this is a person who sort of would be in between, say, the systems department and access services, but help us work with all the software and technology that isn't like big systems, like an ERM system or like a virtual commons or Koha or something like that, but rather desktop software specialized. We have an education department here that uses all the specialized testing software. We have scanners that need to be set up and need to be put on the network. We're constantly using basically you cannot use a library these days without the mediation of technology. And that's it. You have to be able to use technology. So we're using a ton of it. We rely a lot on our IT department to help us support some of these technologies. But the reality is, you really should, in my opinion, you should have somebody who is in the library, who is doing that, but works for the library and understands the library's business needs, for lack of a better phrase. So that's going to be one interesting job. It might be a great way to sort of get into systems and kind of move up to do other things. We're also going to have an archives position open. This isn't the archivist, so it would be more of an assistant, but again, working with digitization, really focus more on getting our archives online. We have a really cool archival collection here, and they've done an enormous amount of work on it. We have so much stuff digitized that we need to get it into systems so that people can even find it. So there's a lot of backlog to do there. Let's see what else. We're gonna have another library. Eventually, we probably want to get down the road a data services librarian. So GIS, data analytics, data visualization, research data management, all of that stuff. There's a need here. We have a big geography department that uses GIS all the time, for example. Libraries are not supporting it right now. So there's a lot of interesting stuff coming down the line, and we're sort of reorienting from very print focused to trying to get the tech side up and running here. So there's a lot of chance to build new stuff, build new programs, build new processes.
Awesome. Yeah, that's great. So, well, Kevin, definitely keep in touch with me
I will. Yeah,
about all of that, and so I can pass it along to our students.
absolutely.
Yeah, because yeah, that would
Yeah.
be great. All those things sound really, really awesome, and I could see Sarah and Ray doing.
Yeah, yeah. Always happy, especially obviously you two are interested in tech. So Ray and Sarah, I hope I see you down the road in library land, and all the best to you. Thank you for
Absolutely.
stopping
Good
by.
one. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for
Yeah,
coming. It was
take care.
great. Okay,
Okay. Bye-bye.
bye.